Lyceum Committee for inviting me and making all the arrangements, and I understand for getting a banner outside, which bureaucratically they said was the hardest thing to do. I'd like to begin this morning by telling you what it is I plan to do in my talk to you. And that basically is to talk a little bit about who the deniers are and what is their objective in spreading this kind of vitriol, this kind of hatred. What are they trying to achieve? Why all these efforts at trying to spread these lies and spread these kind of statements? But before I do that, I'd like to begin by reading you a letter that I received shortly after the publication of my book, Denying the Holocaust. It came from someone in Northern California, a man I did not know or do not know, but the letter really amazed me, and I think you'll enjoy it as well. Dear Professor Lipstadt, as I listened to your conversation on the National Public Radio show, Fresh Air, my mind went back to a bizarre event of some years ago. During the 1958-59 season, there appeared on TV a drama later made into the movie Judgment at Nuremberg. From time to time, there was a momentary silence. Not part of the drama, but many of us supposed a temporary audio failure. And then, a day or so later, we had the explanation. Our local utility company, Pacific Gas and Electric, was a co-sponsor of the production. And some official there believed that references to gas chambers would give gas a bad name, parentheses, Uncut sales, question mark, close parentheses. He therefore ordered all such references leaped out. So instead of denying the Holocaust, we have denying the use of gas. As Winston Churchill wrote regarding a totally different situation, one cannot today even reconstruct the state of mind which would render such gestures possible. Sincerely yours, Edgar Andrews. Now I begin my talk with you this morning on Holocaust denial with that letter for a number of reasons. First of all, when you write about the Holocaust as I do, there's very little room for humor or for laughter. So every chance you get, you grab at it. But more importantly, it's to show you how something can be denied or how history can be rewritten for totally extraneous reasons, for totally silly reasons, someone worried about the sale of gas. But finally, it's the quote by Winston Churchill, one cannot today even reconstruct the state of mind which would render such gestures possible. That really is the motivating force for my reading you that letter. Because just as much as one could say one cannot reconstruct the state of mind which would make the Holocaust possible, which would make it possible for people to sit around and make plans to do these things and work this out. And when you see the archives and the documentation the Nazis left, which is mammoth, just mammoth, and much of it, by the way, has been translated into English, the letters they've written, etc. And you realize that sometimes when they're talking about the production effort was stalled, but what they're talking about is the killing process. You know, and various and some of the other things, you sort of boggle that some bureaucrat sat there writing this kind of memo. Or when you see the plans for the gas chamber, the blueprints for the gas chamber, signed by an architect. That some architect sat there figuring out, measuring out how the gas chamber would work, how much room, how many ovens were needed, how many gas pellets, how many places to insert the gas, etc. You really, your mind is boggled. One can't understand the state of mind which would render such gestures possible. But if it's hard to reconstruct that state of mind about the Holocaust, I would say it's equally hard to reconstruct that state of mind about Holocaust denial. Because we're dealing with an incident which, first of all, we have witnesses galore, we have survivors. And by the way, if you've never spoken to a survivor, it's an incredibly important thing to do, and not something every generation will be able to do. Those of you who have young children at home or potential young children at home, and those kids are old enough to sit in these chairs, there won't be survivors around to ask the question of precisely what happened and how was it for you. But we have the survivors, we have the bystanders, the people who lived in the Polish villages all around, who watched the trains go into the camps day after day and come out empty, go in full, come out empty, who smelled the gas, who smelled the burning bodies, I just showed the documentary Show On by Claude Lanzmann to my class. It's a 9.5 documentary, a 9.5-hour documentary. You have to have a lot of commitment to watch it, but it's really brilliant. And he interviews Poles who lived all around the camps. We talk about exactly what happened and how it happened. But more than the survivors and the bystanders and the survivors, we have the perpetrators themselves. They, in essence, may be our best documentation. They left us records. They left us names of the people they killed in most instances, or a good proportion of the instances. They left us exact details. They left us memos. And very often these memos or these lists would be sent not to one place, but to 10, 12 different offices, records of what they did. We're not sure if it was a head of a unit who had just engaged in a mass killing being proud of what he did, or being a little uncomfortable, and by sending out 10 copies of the memo with a list of how many people were killed to his local unit headquarters, to Berlin, to SS headquarters, to Army headquarters, whatever it was, that he was spreading the blame around. So we have all this documentation, and yet we have these deniers denying. And what I'd like to explore with you today is who these people are. What is their motivation? Do they really believe what they say? And what should be our response? And finally, is this a free speech issue? Is this a matter of free speech, free thought, free press? And how do we bring together the idea of open inquiry, which you're all engaged in, being here in a college, or we do that hopefully in all our education, but particularly when we get to upper levels of education, with the idea of what they're putting out as, which is so farcical. But let me start first by telling you a story. I know many of you have read my books, so you know this story. It's a story with which I begin, so just hang in there. I received a call one day, towards the end of my writing the book, and it was a producer of a nationally televised talk show, and she said to me, "Professor Lipstadt, we're doing a show on Holocaust revisionism," her word, not mine, and I'll explain why I don't use that in a minute. Again, some of you who read the book know this. We'd like you to come on the show. I said, okay, well, who else will be on the show? You always have to do that. If you're ever invited to be on one of these talk shows, just don't say yes because, oh boy, it's so sad. Always ask, because you never know who else you're going to be on. And some of the people can be very strange. So she said to me, well, we're going to have some survivors on. I said, that's excellent. And she said, and I'm going to have a woman who runs a resource center for high school students on prejudice and hatred, which deals with issues of the Holocaust, racism, slavery. I said, terrific, because she deals with students studying this. Then she paused and she said, I'm going to have some deniers on as well. I said, well, I'm sorry, I can't and I won't go on. You're writing a book on this topic, our market share is whatever, you have to talk to me in language I don't understand, but I know it was meant to impress me. And I said, well, you don't understand. I won't go on because I won't dignify these people by sitting with them in a discussion. You wouldn't ask a scientist, let's say a geologist or a earth scientist, to sit in a serious discussion with someone who says the earth is flat. Or you wouldn't ask, I have a colleague whose specialty is the South in the 19th century, particularly the period of slavery, who writes all about slavery. You wouldn't ask him to sit in a debate with someone who said slavery didn't happen or slavery really was a terrific thing because it helped people escape from the continent of Africa and do all sorts of wonderful things for them. I said you wouldn't ask him to dignify such nonsensical points of view in a serious discussion. Why do this? And she said, again, she persisted, and I said, but you know, I said that's why I won't do it. I also can't do it. She said, why not? I said, well, because I will sit in a discussion or even a debate with someone on a topic about which I have diametrically opposed opinions. They may feel one way on abortion, I may feel another way. They may feel one way on gun control, I may feel another way, etc. And we may be totally at the opposite ends of the spectrum. But if I can anticipate or expect that they will maintain some fidelity to what I call facticity, to facts, then I can debate them, even though we may interpret the facts differently. They may blame the crime spree on people having guns, on people not having guns, and I may blame it on people having guns. We may take the same statistics and interpret them totally differently. statistics they might cite. In other words, I say we might take the same and say, well, they say this and they say that. That's what you do with statistics. You play with them. But that was a joke. I said, but at least we're not going to make up things. I said, with the deniers, they just make things up and will, or they pull things out to give a different slant. And I gave her a couple of examples. I said, one of the things the deniers are really intent on proving is false is the diary of Anne Frank. Now, why would they be so interested in the diary of Anne Frank? I'll demonstrate it here. For how many people in this room was the diary of Anne Frank one of the first books, if not the first books, or the first things you read about what we call the Holocaust? Okay, I would say we have probably 85% of the audience just raised their hand. Well, what they want to do is say, if you thought the diary of Anne Frank was true, and it's not true, everything else you were told that you thought is true is also, if so facto, everything else you thought is true is also not true. And let me show you what they do with the diary of Anne Frank. How do they try to prove that it's not true? Well, they say things like the diary of Anne Frank was written in ballpoint pen. And ballpoint pen didn't come into use till the 50s. During the 40s, people still used fountain pens. So that they say, how could this be a diary written during the wartime if it was written in ballpoint pen? Well, first of all, it's not a ballpoint pen, but more importantly, the diary was published in the 40s. How could it have been published right after the war in the 40s by Otto Frank, Anne Frank's father? How could it have been written in ballpoint pen if ballpoint pen didn't come into use in the 50s? How could it have been published in the 40s? But more importantly, they do things like they say, in the diary, Anna talks a lot about noise. At one point, she talks about Mrs. Van Dam running the vacuum cleaner. At another point, she talks about a sack of beans breaking open, and the sack was enough. She said the noise was enough to wake the dead. Meet the German woman, Dutch German woman, who had helped them hide from this big sack of beans. So the deniers say things like vacuum cleaners, sacks of beans breaking open, noise enough to wake the dead. This is not the story of someone in hiding. This is nuts. You wouldn't have vacuum cleaners and sacks of beans in a place where people are hiding. How do you answer that? Well, you answer it in two ways. First, you answer it intuitively. Or as it was pointed out to me, in fact, once at a talk where a woman came up to me, and it turns out she was also Dutch. Family had been in the Netherlands for many, many years, a Dutch Jewish family. And they also hid. They hid not far from the Frank family, not knowing the Frank family, but they were in another hiding place, except their story had a much happier ending. They survived. They weren't caught by the Nazis. She said, I wrote a diary too. That was one of the things little girls often did when they were, or young men as well, or boys as well, when they were in hiding. And she said, if I wanted to make up a diary, I wouldn't put in noise. If I was a fiction writer, the fact that it's there gives you a sense of it being the truth. In other words, I used to live in Los Angeles, and everybody in Los Angeles is a frustrated screenwriter. They're all writing a screenplay. And some people write historical screenplays that they want to be very accurate. So they do a lot of research on the Civil War. They do a lot of research on a different period in American history or world history, because they want it to look exceptionally accurate. If I were doing a screenplay on a family in hiding, I don't think I'd put in vacuum cleaners and people, noise enough to wake the dead. It wouldn't sound accurate. So that if someone were making this up and they were thinking, what sounds accurate, they wouldn't put it in. But there's a better way of disproving their claims. Go to the text itself. I know many of your teachers, your professors tell you, look at the text. What is the text saying? Well, you go to the diary itself, and where Mrs. Van Dam is running the vacuum cleaner, it's Sunday night. They hid above a warehouse. On a Sunday night, a warehouse and offices were likely to be empty. Moreover, where the sentence says the noise was enough to wake the dead, the very next sentence says, thank God the warehouse was empty and nobody heard the noise. So the denier who's writing about that sentence, the noise enough to wake the dead, is picking up one sentence, but leaving the other sentence. And thereby shifting the whole meaning. And by the way, that's what the deniers do very often. They come to my speeches and they quote half a sentence in mine, or one sentence without the next sentence, in order to misrepresent what I say. In any case, so I went on in this long talk, explained to her why I can't debate these people, and she said to me, one last stab to get me going on, she said, Professor Lipstadt, I think these are nefarious people. I think they're diabolical people, evil people, telling complete lies. But don't you think our audience should hear the other side? You see, that's the objective of the deniers. to enter the discussion, to enter the debate, if there is a debate, to create a debate, to enter the discussion about the Holocaust, the teaching about the Holocaust, and to create a debate about two sides. But it's akin, as I say, to having two sides. The earth is round, the earth is flat. There was slavery, there wasn't slavery. It's really good to beat children up and abuse them, sexually abuse them. It's not good to beat them up and sexually abuse them. I mean, again, absurd kind of things that we wouldn't even think of debating, which they want to create a debate about. Now, who are these people, and how have they managed to get as much attention as they have? Well, a number of things about them. First of all, they are anti-Semites. They are anti-Semites in a way that passion drives them. That they are so prejudiced. Prejudice runs through every bone of their body. And their anti-Semitic claims, of course, that the Jews made this up, that the Jews did this for a world sympathy, that the Jews had the power to create all this massive documentation, etc. And some of the most anti-Semitic rhetoric I've ever read, I've read by deniers. But they're not just anti-Semites. They're also, many of them are racist. The founder of the denial movement here in the United States, a man named Willis Carto, who's also associated with the Liberty Lobby, one of the most racist anti-Semitic political entities in this country. Willis Carto has been quoted as talking about the dangers to America from the quote-unquote niggerification of America. That's the kind of person he is. He also is a burning denier. Who wants to bring in more racist, anti-minority, anti-African American elements into the whole denial movement. One of the current younger, quote-unquote, leaders of the denial movement, a man named Mark Weber, has been quoted about talking, I'm paraphrasing what he said, the dangers coming to America, the mongrelization of America, because America is giving too much power to groups of non-white people of color. And more than the fact that so many of the deniers have expressed these racist kinds of attitudes, if you flip it around and you look at groups like the Ku Klux Klan or the White Aryan Nation or the White Aryan Brother, whatever incarnation the hate group, the particular racist hate group has taken for the moment, if you read their so-called ideology or so-called platforms, 9 times out of 10 you will find that including virulently racist statements, it will also include Holocaust denial. And you might ask yourself the question, why do these racists, whose prime objective, of course, is a racist objective or motivation, programs are racist motivation, why would they turn to Holocaust denial? Well, as one of them wrote in one of the major publications of a far-right party in England, or a racist party in England, they say every time we want to talk about the quote-unquote natural superiority of white people, end of quote, we're told, oh, that's Nazi science, that's what the Nazis thought, that's the kind of science the Nazis practiced, and that led to a Holocaust. So they say, you see, the Holocaust is being used to keep us from talking about the, quote, natural superiority of white people, end quote. And so they use Holocaust denial in their way to achieve their racist objectives. One of the people, David Duke, whose name, thank God, is fading now, at least momentarily, from the horizon, when he was in the Louisiana legislature and he was running for governor of Louisiana, he expressed not only highly racist things, but also all kinds of Holocaust denial. Material was sold from his offices, from his state offices, etc. So you find these both racist and anti-Semites, but they're not just that. They're also neo-Nazis. Sometimes I wonder why we bother saying neo, just like Nazis would be better. They are interested, particularly the deniers in Europe, are interested in the resurrection of the National Socialists, of the Nazi Party, as a viable political alternative. They want to make it something that will have a say in the political parties, and you can vote for, you'll be able to vote for a National Socialist Party or some kind of incarnation of a National Socialist Party. So what do? They deal in what I call immoral equivalencies. That's an immoral equivalency. They would say to me, and I interviewed a couple of these deniers until they stopped talking to me when they realized that there was no convincing me that they were right. They will say things like, a war is terrible. Bad things happen in every war. No army is without its blemishes. No army does things wrong. It's just a given. Sure, the Germans did things wrong, but the Allies did things wrong too. And then they'll engage in all these immoral equivalencies. They'll say things like, well, yes, the Germans bombed London and the population in London, but the Allies bombed Dresden and Cologne. Or they'll say things, yes, the Nazis had camps, concentration camps, because they admit there were concentration camps. They can't not, the evidence, the soldiers walked right into it. They'll say, but no one was ever killed in those camps, or no one was ever purposely killed. People died, but they were in protective custody. God should protect me from that kind of protective custody. Protect all of us. But then they say, but yes, the Germans had camps, but the Americans had detention camps for the Americans of Japanese descent. Very often we say we had detention camps for the Japanese. We didn't have them for the Japanese. We had them for the Americans of Japanese descent. As well, there were some Japanese citizens there as well, but the vast majority were American citizens who were put in those detention camps. Now, those camps were racistly motivated. There's no question about that those detention camps. We never had camps for the Germans, Americans of German descent. We never had camps for Americans of Italian descent, but we had camps for Americans of Japanese descent. Even if you thought of it as a security measure, an American of Japanese descent was much less of a security risk than American of a German or Italian descent, because American of Japanese descent, if they were, let's say, suddenly someone was there as a spy for Japan and they were poking around in a place where they shouldn't be, you would be more likely to notice that that person doesn't belong there than if the person were, just because of the racial differences, and if you were on. So it was clearly a racist thing, and it was unconstitutional. As long as they were, there's nothing to compare them to a Dachau or a Bergen-Belsen. That's not to justify them, it's just to show the wrongness of this immoral equivalency. But that doesn't matter for the deniers. They just go through this immoral equivalency all through the war, trying to find, and for everything wrong the Germans did, here's what the Allies did wrong. So it doesn't matter if it works or not, they work it out. But there's nothing they can find to do an immoral equivalency with the Allied behavior for the Holocaust. So what they're left with is the Holocaust. The only way they can deal with that is by saying it didn't happen, and by denying it. And it is the equivalent that some students here, some of the faculty, we were saying before this, it's the big lie. The bigger the lie, the easier it is to try to say it's not true. Goebbels proved that to be true. Goebbels, Adolf Hitler's propaganda chief. So we have racist objectives, anti-Semitic objectives, neo-Nazi objectives, political objectives, and of course they are conspiracy theorists in the extremes. Just think about it. I mean, the absurdity of this. There is no other atrocity in human history on which there is so much documentation, so much official documentation. We only have it doesn't exist, but if we had that kind of official documentation on the history of slavery, we could write a much better and fuller portrait of what went on in this country. And many other instances in world history, but there's none with such extensive documentation. This was a bureaucratic effort. There were all sorts of bureaucrats writing reports back and forth on exactly what was going on, how it should be done, what should be done. We have, as I said earlier, the survivors, we have the bystanders, we have the perpetrators themselves. Not just their documents, but the perpetrators themselves who say I did it. Now some will say it was terrible, I was following orders, I didn't have a choice, but they don't say it didn't happen. So the perpetrators themselves say they did it, and these people are walking around saying it didn't happen. Which again is a reflection of this big line part of mentality. Then they'll say things like this one denier, a man named David Irving, who says, I only believe in documents. Show me the document that says, I, Adolf Hitler, hereby order the annihilation of the Jews, and then I'll believe it happened. Well, first of all, there is no document like that. And probably will never be found a document like that. Because that's not how Hitler worked. He didn't say, he didn't write a report, I hereby order the invasion of the Soviet Union, I hereby order the invasion of France. He gave these statements, he did these things orally, and sometimes he did them indirectly, but that was not the kind of thing that they put on paper. Plus the fact they were very careful with some of these things, not to, at the very top, not to write things down, because they didn't want to take, they knew that the world would not approve. Though once you get further down, the bureaucrats are writing a storm. But the other irony is, if David Irving, who accuses all these documents of being forged, he says, oh, all these these reports and all these little lists, they're just forgeries. If whoever these hoaxers were in David Irving's mind, who supposedly made up this hoax, could have forged all these documents, why didn't they forge a document that says, I, Adolf Hitler, hereby order the annihilation of the Jews, secretly planted someplace where it should be discovered, and then we discovered the document. Oh, now we have the document, everything is proof. Because these documents weren't forged, and because there's no such documents like that. But interestingly, and to go back to much of the theme of your Lyceum events, sometimes when I'm being interviewed by television or radio reporters, etc., recently when I was in Australia and New Zealand and I was on the radio a lot, one of the reporters who clearly thinks these people are nuts and kooks and dangerous people said to me, Professor Lipstadt, do you ever think we will find that document? And I said, no, because it probably doesn't exist. Because that's not how the Nazis operated. But in his mind, it already was an issue of, until we find that document, we won't have the exact proof, which of course is ludicrous because we have reams and reams of evidence and reports, and as well as eyewitness commentaries. Now, how have they managed to get so much attention? And this again goes, I think, to the heart of what you were looking at in your events this year. One of the things they figured out a number of years ago was that if you want to win friends and influence people, the best way of doing that, the most important thing is how you package your message. I think it's also what various people who want to sell you things have figured out as well. Packaging. So what they did is think about the fact that if they had this neo-Nazi, racist, anti-Semitic agenda, people weren't going to pay them much attention if they were overtly anti-Semitic, overtly racist, overtly neo-Nazi, that really hung out and showed what their ideology was. So they figured out, don't show it up front so much, but let us present ourselves really as academics, put on academic suits and look a little scruffy, but not too scruffy, somewhere in between. And let us hold scholarly sounding conferences, and let us publish scholarly looking journals that look very impressive, a nice shiny cover, picture on the cover, and academic looking articles with lots of footnotes and narrow margins. Didn't matter that what was in it was all half-truths and made up kind of stuff, but it'll look good. And if it looks, or it'll look, not only look good, it'll look scientific, it'll look academic, it'll look balanced. It won't look like a broadsheet, like a printed thing that says, kill Jews, kill African Americans, kill people of color, or they all belong out of this country, or whatever it might say. So let it look scholarly, let it look recent. And we'll just say, we're not anti-Semitic, we're not racist, we just want the truth. So they presented this in this way. You know what it's like? I mentioned him before, and I'll repeat it again. Many of you, I'm sure, remember David Duke. David Duke, who was a former, Grand Magician of the Ku Klux Klan, Wizard, Grand Magician. It only was a joke. Of the Ku Klux Klan. When he was running around in his bedsheet and his comb head, as a Ku Klux Klan official, nobody paid him much attention unless you were doing, the news media didn't pay him much attention unless they were doing a story on Ku Klux Klan in America, or racism in America, or extremism in America, something like that. But then David Duke got smart. David Duke got rid of the bedsheet, took off the comb head, stopped being the Grand Magician of the Klan, or the Wizard, whatever, and went and got himself a nice suit, haircut, made over, total physical makeover and transformation, and nothing wrong with that. But he said, those were the days of my youth. I don't believe that anymore. I'm interested now in just looking at the ethnic division in America. I just want extreme welfare reform in the extreme, or no more doing away with welfare, or I want this, I want that. The truth was, what he was saying was virtually the same thing he was saying when he was running around as a member of the Ku Klux Klan, but he had learned to package it. The New Republic ran a very, very good article exposing Duke for this repackaging of himself when he was running for governor in Louisiana. And it was a terrific expose, but I think it also won the prize for the best title. It was called The Hazards of Duke. It's nice to be talking to an audience which doesn't need that explained when I tell you. So good about that. You know, I say, ask your kids. But in any case, it's the gentrification of hatred, the packaging of hatred, or the deduplication, however you want to call it, of hatred. Just package it up so it sounds good. I would say that some of the things we saw on this past Tuesday are very similar. The repackaging of hatred, of extremism, so that it sounds good, but it's the same message. That's much more dangerous. I worry much less about the neo-Nazis who march in the streets of Germany or Austria or other parts of Europe in leather jackets, skinhead swastikas and things like that. I don't worry about them so much, not to say that they don't do damage and they've done some terrible things, but I worry about them less because I can see who they are and what they are. What I worry about is when those people figure out that they're going to get much more mileage by getting rid of the skin, letting their hair grow in, getting rid of the leather jacket, getting rid of the swastika, looking respectable, but saying the same thing and saying, oh, I'm not a racist. I just believe that. I'm not an anti-Semite. I just believe that. Then it's harder to pin them down, and more importantly, then lots of people who would be repulsed by their overts, the swastika and the Ku Klux Klan outfit, can find those extremist attitudes of prejudice and hate a little more acceptable. And that's what the deniers have figured out. So they have packaged their hatred and packaged their lies in this pseudo-academic package. Now, what happened when they came to the campuses and have come to the campus? First of all, why have they targeted various campuses, mainly larger universities? Or they may come here, we don't know. They haven't activated this campaign in the past couple of months, but it's gotten them so much bang for their buck that I'm sure they will do it again. They come to the campus with a camera-ready copy, all ready to go to print, cashier's check, and the copy of the article will read, there was no Holocaust. You're allowed to question all sorts of things, but you can't question the Holocaust, And some of the universities which have received these ads have published them. Let me read you some of the copy from the most recent ad. Came out last year. It says, you have a right to know. It says, a revisionist view of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. by Bradley Smith, a denier. And he says, first of all, that the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum displays no proof anywhere of homicidal gassing chambers, and no proof that even one individual was gassed at any camp liberated by Allied armies. Well, to some degree, he's true. He's correct. No individual was gassed at a camp liberated by an Allied army. The camps where the gassing mechanisms were liberated by the Soviets. The Soviets weren't under the Allied command. They were allies with a small a, but they weren't under the Allied command. Britain and France and the United States, Canada, Australia had one commanding system. So, in other words, here it's again because the Soviets came to the camps in Poland. That's where the death camps were. The Americans came to the camp, the British, the French came to the camps in Western Europe. They met in the middle. So it's the Soviets who liberated. But that's how they twist. But then after attacking the museum, they go on to attack me, and as people point out, I'm in very respectable company. So Deborah Lipstadt argues in her much praised Denying the Holocaust that revisionist deniers should not be debated because there cannot be another side to the Holocaust story. She charges that it is hateful to listen to a defense of those accused of mass murder. In essence, she argues that we bury America's old civil virtues of free inquiry and open debate, but to what end? The Deborah Lipstadt, but now a proper noun. Don't you forget it. And there is a clique of them on every campus. I'd like to meet the clique here after my talk. Work to suppress revisionist research and demand that students and faculty ape their fascist behavior. If you refuse to accept the Lipstadt clique as your intellectual furors, you risk being slandered as an anti-Semite. Now, not only is that libelous, but it's ludicrous. They say, I want to bury America's old civil virtues of free inquiry and open debate. Then if you came to my course on the Holocaust, you'd see that the course virtually is built all on questions and debate. We debate. I would say we debate just about every topic. We debate, did Hitler think up this idea for the Holocaust all by himself? And did it work its way down the chain of command? Or did it start down below with a couple of underlings and work its way up? A. B, the Holocaust. Is it the same as so many other atrocities that we've seen in human history? Or is there some something different here? Is there something unique here that makes it an exceptional case? Maybe not worse, but certainly exceptional in terms of history. That's a very big debate. C, was it something that the Nazis planned to do right from the beginning? As soon as they got to power, this was all part of a plan step by step, or is it something that they only decided to do when they saw the rest of the world was sort of turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to their actions? Could America have done more? Is it right even to think that America should have done more? Was it America's concern? Another issue, rescuers. What about the people who rescued? Non-Jews who hid Jews at the risk of not only their lives, but their whole family's lives. Why weren't there more? How many were there? What led them to do it? Were they doing something truly heroic, or were they the only people acting like human beings when everybody else was acting like a lout? Jews who were leaders in the ghettos, who were appointed by the Nazis to be leaders in the ghettos, were they collaborators? I mean, I hate to even say, or could they have done something different? Were they trying the best to make the worst, were they trying the hardest to make the best of a terrible situation? And there are ways to go back and forth, back and forth. If the world had spoken out in 33, 34, 35, 36, could it have been stopped? We don't know, but we talk about those kinds of things and debate back and forth, and I don't have a fixed opinion on many of them. But to debate whether there was a Holocaust or not is the equivalent of debating whether there was slavery or not. It's the equivalent of going into a child psychology class and saying, let's debate whether beating up children, not just hitting them once in a while, but beating them up so that they're physically maimed is a good thing or a bad thing. Let's debate whether sexual abuse of children is a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe it shows children in the most intimate way possible that the adult really loves them. It sounds stupid, right? It sounds absurd. It's more than stupid. It sounds frightening. You wouldn't have that. But that's the equivalent of what we're debating here. Now, again, I'm not against freedom of opinion. People can have lots of opinions. And I believe they should. That's part of the excitement of teaching in a university atmosphere, in a college atmosphere. But there's a difference between did it happen or didn't it happen, and should it happen or how it happened. You know, one can debate whether there should have been a Republican victory on Tuesday or not, but to debate whether there was or wasn't is ludicrous. So I think that that's a point to understand. Well, what happened when the students got these ads? Some of the students said, oh, these ads, you know, when they got the ads, a number of students on campus, and not just Jewish students, came to the editors and said, you can't publish this. You yourself say you don't publish in a newspaper your advertising post. You won't publish racist material, you won't publish sexist material, you won't publish material that's demeaning to religious groups. They say you won't publish anti-Semitic material. They say, oh, this is not anti-Semitic, it just says there was no Holocaust. Well, to say that there was no Holocaust is not anti-Semitic because who are they saying who made up the hoax? The Jews, and why the Jews made up this hoax. But then the students went on and said, oh, well, this is a free speech issue. It's a freedom of speech. It's a First Amendment issue. Well, that also is a mistake. How does the First Amendment read? Do we know what the First Amendment reads? First Amendment, which we quote all the time, we should know how it reads. Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of press, speech, etc. In other words, the First Amendment says what the government cannot do. The government can't say to you, if you are a publisher of a paper, you can't put that article in. Yes, if it's a security risk, in certain articles they can, certainly if it's treasonous or whatever, but in most articles they can't say you can't put that in. It doesn't mean that you, as a publisher of a newspaper or an editor of a newspaper, have to take everything that comes your way. If any of you are involved here in campus publishing, or in high school you were involved in publishing, you know that part of your job was picking and choosing. This ad will put in, this article will put in, this article we won't put in. And when it comes to ads, newspapers pick and choose all the time. For instance, many newspapers won't run ads for movies for X-rated movies. They say, we just don't do that. They won't run porno ads. The editor of the Atlanta Constitution was telling me that not long ago they received an ad for leasing of cars. The big headline, lease a Buick or whatever it was for, and the price was given. And the people in the automotive division of the advertising pages were struck by the price. Because the price was, let's say, a good 20% a month less, 20% total, less than any other price being advertised. And they know that the leasing margin was so small that to make it 20% less, they said, this company can't be making money. How can they be So they read the ad more closely, and you know, on the bottom, when the newspaper, when the airlines give something a great fare, and on the bottom it says it's on 3 seats on each plane every 2 months, you know, and you can't fly Monday to Friday or over the weekend, and you get no peanuts, and et cetera, et cetera. And then by the time you put all those things in, you know, these fares will work for no one. But on the bottom, in that teeny kind of script, it said that this price was applied if you leased more than 10 cars at a time. It was a fleet lease. Well, fleet leases are always cheaper, because, you know, cheaper by the dozen. And for the fleet lease price, it was exactly the right price. But it was what we call bait and switch. You get someone to call and then give them the difference. And the newspaper rejected it, because they said, we don't run ads that are designed to mislead our readers. You want to say that? Say that price for a fleet lease. Call us for individual leasing. So that it's not a First Amendment issue, because again, newspapers made those choices. But let's move beyond the First Amendment. Some newspapers said, well, this is just an other side. Let me give you some examples from the newspapers that said that. For instance, the Cornell paper talked about the fact that it was the paper's responsibility to present other points of view. The paper, or the University of Washington, we have to have a forum for diverse opinions and ideas. Michigan Daily said we can't reject unpopular views. Well, a view is one thing. Utter nonsense, an utter made-up kind of thing. Like, my view is that the Republicans lost big on Tuesday. And I want you to run an op-ed piece saying that. And your view could be is that they should have lost big on Tuesday, but to say that they did. In other words, not everything is a point of view. Some things are ludicrous. Some things just don't correspond to the facts. You can argue the subjective, but there are many objective truths. And we, as faculty members, and you as students, have to be able to, even as you recognize the importance of discussion and debate on ideas, and this is a very safe place. Higher education is a very safe place, it should be, to debate and discuss all sorts of things. At the same time, you have to also recognize that's complete farce. And not everything is a matter of debate. As I said, not a matter of debate what happened on Tuesday. Why? Yes, certainly a matter of debate. Could have been avoided? Certainly a matter of debate. Could have been bigger? Certainly a matter of debate. Impact on America? A matter of debate. But that didn't happen? Not a matter of debate. So this idea, when the students wrote that, they were doing exactly what that producer said, other side. They were making this into an other side. The Harvard Crimson, which rejected the ad, as did the paper at Brown and at Dartmouth and MIT, but the Harvard Crimson got it best. They wrote that the ad is trying to present itself as a controversial argument based on questionable, as a controversial argument. You know, it's controversial, but put us in because we're controversial. But as the Harvard Crimson went on to say, what the ad really was, and what the deniers really are publishing, is vicious propaganda based on utter bullshit that has been discredited time, it's a quote, has been discredited time and time again. In other words, it may dress itself up as, oh, we're just trying to investigate ideas, but the truth is it's vicious propaganda that's based on utter bullshit. Quote. To mistake that is to make a serious mistake. Let me read you just on this one last thing on this campus thing. An editorial by a student editor who decided to publish the ad. And he wrote to explain why. And as I started to read it, I said, oh, this is a very good column. And I read the following paragraphs. There is enough undeniable proof for the existence of the Nazi atrocity for the educated to understand why it should not happen again. The real question is not whether it happened, but how many people don't know that it happened. If we allow this incident to become a dusty piece of history, it becomes more likely for the population as a whole to doubt its existence. However, if the Holocaust and the events leading up to it are kept fresh by dissent and debate, the chances of history repeating itself are greatly reduced. You know, so far so good, and I was intrigued. Well, if he felt that, why would he publish these ads? And then he went on in the next paragraph. He said, I will not stop articles like the deniers from being published. There are two sides to every issue, and both have a place on the pages of any open-minded paper's editorial page. This is an exercise on how much we actually believe in our founding fathers' precious document, the Bill of Rights. I think what this ad shows is that some people can have such open minds that their brains fall out. This editor is from a college in Buffalo, so I wrote him a note. This ad reached me right around the time of the Super Bowl. I said, the day after the Super Bowl, I hope you ran an op-ed piece that the Buffalo Bills won and the Buffalo Bills lost. There are two sides to every issue. But that's the kind of taking something to its ludicrous conclusion. Finally, why don't I call them revisionists, but deniers? Why have I made? And by the way, on that one issue, I think I have accomplished something, because more and more, if you go through indices of media references, they're called deniers. Because these people aren't revising anything. History, when you take a history class or you read history books, most of the time, what the author is trying to do is to look at an event and ask a question about the event. In other words, to look at the history of America and say, this is the history of how we understand the United States, but if we had the voices of women in a particular period, would it change our perception of history? If we had the choices of minority, if we're writing a history of the South in the 19th century, where are the voices of the slaves? Where are the voices of the oppressed? How does that revise how we understand history? So always historians, or like a fact, they discover new documents, or they interpret something differently. When you mix it into what the pre-existing body of knowledge, how does it revise our understanding? That's what the deniers want to be thought of as revising, but they're not revising. They're simply denying something that is true. Let me end by, first of all, just talking for a moment about how dangerous I see these people. Now, it may seem very strange to you after writing a book on it and talking about it so much, that I don't think the deniers are a clear and present danger. I think they are a clear and future danger, but the very near future. Why do I say that? First of all, any group that is so motivated by hatred and so motivated by prejudice doesn't give up the fight. Prejudice is something that consumes you, hatred is something that consumes you, and people who hate are usually much more vigorous than people who don't. People who are prejudiced are much more vigorous in their efforts than people who are not. A. B, when there will not be first-hand witnesses around to say, this is what happened to me, this is my story, when there aren't survivors to tell you, day one, this is what happened, we got to Auschwitz, etc., etc., then it also will be much more distant. I was telling the students before we began that I have two cousins, and they're approximately 15, 17 years older than I am. And they grew up in Cincinnati, where their father had a very small, modest store, a struggling businessman, but he had one or two people who worked for him in the store. And one of the people who worked for him was an African-American man named Mr. Washington, Charlie Washington. And my cousins, when they were very young, used to call him Mr. Charlie Washington. They thought his last name was Charlie Washington. They remember him quite clearly. They remember when they were very young, he already was very old, and they remember how he would walk almost bent over because he was so old. He was quite an old age. And at that point already, there was very little he could really do around the store because he was too old, but my uncle and aunt kept him on in whatever capacity they could because he had worked for them so long, they were very close. Well, Charlie Washington had been born a slave on a plantation. And he used to tell my cousin stories of his childhood, his memories of the Civil War, which were dim. He'd been very young. And he would take my cousin sometimes to visit friends of his, particularly one woman whose name I forget, my cousins would certainly know, who they described very vividly. She would sit on the porch of her house in a rocking chair, and she would teach them slave songs, and songs that she sung as a child. So here are two cousins who are 15 years older than I am, for whom slavery is not something that happened in America in the 19th century. For them, it is something that happened to Charlie Washington and Charlie Washington's friends. For your kids, for little kids playing on playgrounds in schools not far from here, when they sit in these seats, when it's their turn to be here, the Holocaust won't be something that happened recently, a far more distant memory. And as you know, when something gets further away, it's easier to rewrite history. So it's those two things. It's the tenacity of prejudice and the fact that the first-hand witnesses will die off. The documentation will be there. It's there in an overwhelming way. But these people will go, because people who hate, it doesn't matter whether they're anti-Semites, it doesn't matter whether they're racist, usually they're one and the same. They hate with a passion. And hatred and prejudice is extremely tenacious. They'll hang in there. But truth and memory are exceedingly fragile. So it is your job, whatever you end up doing, whatever field of activity you end up in, while you're on this campus and as you go out, I would say, and I think your presence here this morning, your invitation to me this morning, is to keep fighting the good fight for truth, for memory. You've got to be champions of truth, champions of memory, because, as I say, it is exceedingly fragile, and prejudice and hatred is exceedingly tenacious. Thank you very much. Time for questions, and I'll be happy to take them. Yes?
I listened to your speech, and I read your book, and confirmed my impression after you talked to that your thesis is that every single person who is in this revisionist movement, in every country of the world, that all of them are conscious liars and are motivated by being paid. I think that's a very unfair and exaggerated statement of position. First of all, you omit the names of people like John Tolan, the Pulitzer Prize-winning American historian who's married to Japanese.
Okay, get to your question, please.
My question is, your credentials compared to those of David Irving's are next to nothing. And he's published a whole book.
All right, let me make...
Is he the most widely read historian in the English language? Is he a conscious liar motivated by hate?
First of all, that's not... Just a minute, I'll answer your question. First of all, that's not the thesis of my book, so I think your whole question is premised on a false thesis. In fact, in the book, I do say quite clearly, and I say it in my speeches and my articles, that there are many people who've been duped by these deniers, duped by what they have to say, who've been confused by them, and I'm much more interested in them than I'm interested in the deniers, because as I say, most of the deniers, and David Irving's credentials, wrote a lot of books, but his credentials are quite questionable, as any serious historian will tell you, and any respected historian is hardly respected. Is someone who's also been at the fringes of virtually everything he's written about. He has this absurd theory that Hitler didn't even know about what was going on. All the Poles knew about it, the Polish peasants knew about it, but he didn't know about it. So I would argue that the vast majority of those at the heart of this are certainly motivated by a great degree of hatred. You got to be a hater too, or you got to be prejudiced and know that you're lying, know that you're making up when you quote one sentence and leave the other sentence out. When you take half a fact and you put it in there, when you say there's not one document on this, when we know there are reams of documents. So in order to consciously write that kind of stuff, you got to know you're lying. Many of the people they affected, they've been confused, and those are the people I would really like to address. And I would hope you're in the latter category, not the former, but I can't quite tell from your question.
Professor Lipstadt, you're not a historian, are you? You're a professor of religion, I believe.
I have a joint appointment in religion and in history.
Yeah. You're not very familiar with the world's archives. Will you accept that I, David Irving, I'm the person that you've been smearing in this speech and in your book, and I think this is the first occasion I've had a chance to meet you face to face, because you do evade debate, to avoid discussion. That I have spent 30 years writing and publishing books in the world's leading publishing houses, including the Viking Press, William Morrow, E.P. Dutton.
I'm not here to hear your...
I bet you have smeared me. You tried to pretend that I'm on some kind of fringe. And this is totally... You say that respectable historians don't respect me. If you have a look on the back of this book, and I've got a copy of this book for every member of this audience here, please help yourself on your way out. You'll see what respectable historians around the world say about my writings.
Well, okay, listen, sir, I'm not here to... I'm not here...
All right, here's a question. Here's $1,000 for you, madam. If you can produce the document that you mentioned earlier in your speech, namely a blueprint of a gas chamber showing where the pellets were put in. You mentioned this, you're trying to gull these gullible students because they believe in you, because you have the title of professor in front of your name.
Mr. Irving,
there's $1,000.
Excuse me,
I'm asking you a question. Where is this document?
I have
$1,000 if you can produce it. You have no idea where it is because you invented it.
I didn't invent anything. Well, I refer you, and then I'll turn to the student for a much more legitimate question.
These are legitimate questions. You're smearing me around the world. You went to Australia, you went to New Zealand. Who paid for your fare to Australia and New Zealand? Who paid you the fee? If you're not
I
going
went
to
on
tell me what
freaking
you're
flyer
trying
miles, and I got no fee. So that's
you paid your own
thank you,
airfares.
Delta Airlines.
You paid your own airfares.
Excuse me.
Shall I tell the students who paid for you?
Excuse me.
Then you know exactly who's behind this whole campaign. $1,000.
I have no desire for your
You
money.
told the students about a blueprint. Produce the blueprint or shut up. $1,000.
Excuse me. This is the kind of tactic. I would refer all the students, not David Irving, but I would refer all the various students who are interested in this material to the work of Jean-Claude Pressac, where you have documentation. Where you have, excuse me.
Not one.
Excuse me. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, it's my turn now. I gave you a lot of time, even though what I think you have to say is virtually worthless. But I did. You can look in this work. In fact, Jean-Claude Pressac was a man who thought the deniers had something to say. A Frenchman, non-Jew, who was intrigued by what the leading deniers had to say. Thought they had a point. Spent 2 days in the Auschwitz archives, and within 2 days, and now spent much more time there studying this. Came up with reams of documentation and reams of plans. Excuse me, stop it.
You're putting over there.
On the gas chambers and on the killing process, and it's all documented quite extensively. I cite some of this documentation in my book, and there's much more that's available. I'm sure it's in your library. Yes?
I was just curious if most of the deniers are older, like say 50 plus, and if that's, the truth of memory, the fragility of memory and truth, and do you have much faith in people, the younger generation?
I can't give you an exact number because I haven't, done. The people that I've read about, most of them are, yes, in that 50 age range, generally not alive or very young, children, not participants in the war. But the deniers do have the potential for having an impact on younger people.
We have the facts on our side. We work in the archives. You don't.
Nobody came here to hear you.
Here's a picture of Auschwitz. That's a picture of Auschwitz concentration camp.
Stop it.
Show me
Come
one
on,
pile of
Mr.
coke.
Irving, just sit down.
There should have been 2,000 tons of coke
All right,
to donate the bodies.
can we get,
Where are the piles of coke?
since, yeah, okay.
There's not one document. I offered you $1,000 for that
He just
document.
said one statement that's right, friends. He said there's not one document. There isn't one document. There
Here we
are
go.
reams and reams of documents
About gas chambers.
on gas chambers,
Not one.
on details.
Not one.
Okay.
$1,000
And the
for one
Republicans
document.
lost big on Tuesday.
Here's $1,000.
Excuse me.
$1,000 for one document.
You know,
Find the reams of it.
this is the antics. These are the typical. I'm sort of glad Mr. Irving has brought his show here on the road.
So why
Because it gives you an example. Gives you an example.
All around Australia.
Excuse me. It
refusing
gives
to
you
debate.
Excuse me, I believe it's my turn. I'm the sponsor of the Lyceum Committee, and the tradition of the Lyceum Committee, we have nothing written down, is that each member of the audience is entitled to a question and a follow-up question. And after that, the floor goes to someone else.
I apologize.
Until
I was
everyone.
on my computer.
Didn't know the proper behavior of lectures.
How am I supposed
Okay,
to do
let's, you're important.
Everyone's entitled to one copy of my book on their way out.
Shut
Please tell
up.
yourself and you're saying you're lying.
Enough. But this is a man who will never be quiet. I'm glad he came. Central Casting couldn't have sent me a better person to show you the tenacity of prejudice and hatred. This is a prime example. Yes, can I get some other questions, please?
All I see here is like antagonism. You said you would go on a talk show for debate.
You wish to debate
Talk
me?
shows aren't about
You wish to
debate.
prevent debate?
Shut up and ask the question.
Let the clown say it's all right.
Talk shows
I was here on the other side of the
I can't.
on the platform. Why and where I was here.
I can't hear. Could you speak up? We're having some competition with that.
Okay.
I'll stay here to tell you more lies about it.
Watch a lot of people's face. You know, it doesn't happen. It's an argument show.
Right.
The kind of things that they're playing, it's like that of children. You know, when you're a kid and say you're antagonizing your big sister, black and white, you don't want to agree with anything. Just the kids are off. That's all I'm seeing.
I think you're making a very good point. The point of the objective of all these TV shows that I refuse to go on is ratings and to get fireworks, and get people. Because if there aren't people yelling and screaming at each other, then there is no interest in what is being said. So that's another reason why I refuse to go on. If there's no fireworks, there's no debate, then we don't have to go through this. As I said before, there's nothing in history. There's no incidents in history, no events such as this, which is as well documented in all its aspects. And I just recommend you to reams of books. And if you have the language skills, the reams of documents which go into this. Yes, please. Yes.
Yes. What I wanted to ask was, is anyone making an attempt to document the testimonies of survivors of Holocaust? Is anyone videotaping them, having them show the tattoos that are given? So there are efforts being made to document.
There is extensive documentation, not as much as one would hope, because we'll never get to all the survivors, but there are projects at Yale, there are projects at UCLA, there are projects at quite a few major universities, and Steven Spielberg is taking much of the profits, virtually I think all the profits of his movie Schindler's List, and is plowing them into a project exactly for what you're talking about, to get those voices and those people giving sort of a portrait of their life and their experience. Yes. Yes.
All lack of knowledge of that young people do that.
Okay.
Is there some way to make this more relevant to their life?
Okay, first of all, the poll you're talking about was a Roper poll that was taken in April '93. And it was the question that was asked was very poorly worded. It said, do you believe or disbelieve, does it seem, I'm paraphrasing, is it impossible to you or impossible to you that the Holocaust did not happen? So it's double negative and very poorly worded. And there was a lot of criticism by Gallup and others of the wording of this poll and how it was portrayed and how the question was set out there. So that Roper did a follow-up and asked the question straight out without the double negative, and then it came to 4%, 3 or 4%. And that's been the same impact studies been done in Australia and various and sundry other places as well. So the impact, despite the yelling, despite the screaming, despite waving around the antics, whatever it might be, the impact of the deniers has been very limited. My concern, as I said at the very end, is a long-range concern, using my cousin's examples of, for them, slavery being omnipresent as an experience that they can associate with people they know, and when you won't have that personal connection around it. Yes, other questions? Yes.
I just wanted to first to praise, because it's obvious in the beginning of your book that you face not only your own trepidations in bringing this to life, but as a result you give kind of a audience to that, because you presented it so with such in-depth information.
Thank you.
Also, one of from your colleagues. So I praise you for what you did and the extent that you did do it. To me, it sheds light on something that's completely darkened. And as someone as young as I am, I want to know. But also, tell me on a personal level, what was your greatest obstacle for all the research you had to do and all the time you put into it? Plus, obviously, you've hit it right at the heart. I mean, not be saying such a display of ignorance as you did today. You've obviously made an impact, which I'm sure, even though it's been an interruption to this, you'll walk away feeling I hit him at the heart good. I'm sure that there's a good part of this. But back to my question.